Hello, welcome. Glad to see so many people here so early in the morning. My name is Michael Buravoy, and I am chairing this presidential session. There are two presidential sessions, one at the beginning and one at the end, and they are designed to pursue the theme of the conference, Facing an Unequal World, Challenges for Global Sociology. As you know, this is the theme not just of these two presidential plenaries, but also a wonderful series of plenaries that go through the week. They're all in your program. So today is the first plenary, and we have really outstanding panelists who will be presenting their work. I chose these people with a number of criteria in mind: the sort of originality of their approach to inequality globally, their commitment to the way inequality operates in different parts of the world, the different meanings of inequality. And I also wanted not just to introduce famous sociologists who have been established for many years, but generally in these plenaries to also introduce younger sociologists. And I wanted to bring people to the ISA who hadn't always been very present in the ISA activities. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say a few words about all four of them, and then we will proceed. Each panelist will have 15 to 20 minutes. They will speak from here, and then when we have questions, we'll sit over there. So we will begin, according to the program, with Guy Standing. He is from the School of African and Oriental Studies, and he is well known for his book on the Precariat. Actually, the original book of 2011 is called The Precariat, The New Dangerous Class. And he has a forthcoming book, which I don't believe is actually out yet, but about to be, called A Precariat Charter, From Denizens to Citizens, which pursues a more manifesto-type approach to the precariat. He's also interested, very committed to basic income grants and done a lot of work in India. The second speaker today is Sarah Motsuetsa from University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. And she published in 2011 a very important book about survival in South Africa. It's called Eating from One Pot: The Dynamics of Survival in Poor South African Households. She has done a lot of research among the more marginalized populations in South Africa. Our third speaker is Chizuko Ueno from the University of Tokyo. I'd say that she's a sort of public sociologist here in Japan. Actually, I should say she's probably a public feminist. Very well known, has written many books. The books in English are Nationalism and Gender, that came out in 2004, and The Modern Family in Japan, 2009. And the final speaker is Luc Boltanski from l'École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. That is the major social science center in Paris. And he has written also many books, had a long career, but most recently our attention has been drawn to two. One is On Justification, Economies of Worth. That was written with Laurent Thévenot. It came out in French in 1991 and in English in 2006. And the one that actually drew my attention to his work is the book The New Spirit of Capitalism, which he wrote with Yves Chiapello, and that came out in French in 1999 and in English in 2005. These are our four speakers. So, Guy, You want to come up here? And I will intervene, that you'll see me running up here giving people 5-minute notices. I'm going to be tough, not like last night. I'm not... Okay, guy standing.
Good morning. I'm waiting his toughness with trepidation. Actually, the new book has just come out, and if anybody is interested, I have some copies out at the back afterwards. I also have been asked, and before I forget it, to say there's going to be a special session on the Precariat in the following session of debates in RC 44 later this morning. Now, next year is the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta, which for an Englishman is one of the great constitutional documents of all time. It was, in a sense, the first class-based set of demands against the state. It was done by the emerging mass class, the feudal barons, but it also contained a lot of demands for the common man, for the commons, and it enshrined for all time the great legal principles of due process. And those principles are fundamentally important in the 21st century and are by being abused with impunity by the neoliberal state. It's a contextual point I want to make, because millions and millions of people are being converted from citizens to denizens. And a denizen is a person with a more limited range of rights than a citizen. And people in the Precariat, of which I'm going to be speaking, have been losing all the great types of rights: civil, cultural, political, social, and economic. And an argument that goes through the two books is that we need a new Magna Carta, a Precariat charter for the 21st century. And I asked myself when I started to write it, how would it look and how would it be different from a proletariat charter 100 years ago? And I came out with a charter of 29 articles, which are very, very different from what a proletarian charter would have looked like. Put that on one side, and I want to make a few contextual remarks before getting to the main themes of my talk. The contextual remarks are that we are undergoing a global transformation analogous to Polanyi's great transformation. His transformation was about the painful construction of a national market system. And in the process, there was a disembedded phase, as we all know, where inequalities and inequities rose, dominated by financial capital, until there was a crisis, and then the re-embedded phase with the welfare state, labor regulations, and social security. That obviously broke down in the 1970s and 1980s, and the globalization era is the disembedded phase of a global transformation in which financial capital has dominated. Neoliberalism has meant commodification, privatization, individualization, all of these things we know very well, including, very importantly, a systematic dismantling of all institutions and mechanisms of social solidarity. That's a fundamental part of the neoliberal project, and it entailed the unbundling of the firm as a concept and unbundling of occupational communities as well. But the key point, if there is one smoking gun, is that overnight, historically speaking, the world's labor supply quadrupled. And the extra 2 billion workers who became part of the global market system were all habituated and resigned to be receiving 1/50th of what a worker in the United States or Japan or Europe took as acceptable. And although governments made a Faustian bargain for 30 years, allowing cheap credit, tax credits, labor subsidies, you name it, inevitably, as real wages have fallen, there was going to be a crisis. We know what the crisis has led to: the acceleration of wage decline, the great convergence as China and India and other countries gradually raise their wages, while real wages will continue to fall in the rich countries. But in that period, a new class fragmentation has taken place, superimposed on other class structures. We have a plutocracy and elite. I won't have time to discuss them. We have a salariat with long-term employment security, gaining more and more income from non-wages. We have professions, project-oriented types. And the old working class, if not dead, has been dying everywhere. It's underneath them that we have the emerging precariat. And underneath the precariat is a lumpen precariat, the social victims out in the streets desperately trying to survive their social illnesses. Now, how do we define the precariat? First, it has distinctive relations of production. It is expected to habituate itself to a life of unstable labor and unstable living. We know all of the aspects: casualization, temps, interns, zero-hour contracts, crowd labor, which is the massively growing phenomenon at the moment. And all of these things are rather well known, but for me, they're not the most important part of defining the precariat. More important is that people in the precariat have no occupational narrative to give to their lives. They do not feel that they are becoming something, or they are something that they can sign their visas with pride. On the plane coming here, two people sitting next to me said, "What do they mean by occupation on the visa form?" They couldn't sign it. I had to have 5 minutes talking with them in order to decide what I would recommend them to put under their occupation. This sense of lacking an occupation goes with a sense of having to do a lot of work for labor that does not get counted as labor. Work for the state, work for reproduction, work for just carrying out functions of survival. It is also the first class in history where the norm is a level of education and qualifications that is above the level of labor they expect or are expected to perform. And of course, there is extremely low social mobility. The second dimension of the precariat is that it has distinctive relations of distribution. It experiences low, erratic, and slowly declining real wages. It has lost all those enterprise non-wage benefits that were built up in the 20th century. No pensions, no paid holidays, no medical leave, etc. And it has lost rights-based state benefits. This is an important aspect in means testing, behavior testing, and so on. And they are subject to coercion by workfare. Workfare has become one of the most pernicious phenomena in labor markets all over the world and is only getting worse. But in regard of these relations of distribution, the precariat exists in a zone of uncertainty, of unknown unknowns, always on the edge of unsustainable debt. Debt is a systemic part of the system of distribution today. The third dimension is that the precariat has distinctive relations to the state. They are denizens. They're losing all of those rights. And the key aspect to understanding the precariat's social situation today is that they are supplicants. They are beggars. They cannot have any bargaining capacity with any agency of the state. They depend on goodwill or satisfying some bureaucrat or other. They are also being pushed into a system of social apartheid, increasingly pushed into low-income areas and low-opportunity areas, and then, to compound their difficulties, are faced by a panopticon state that is increasing the surveillance powers and the long-term effects of being caught by those powers. But the precariat at the moment is a dangerous class because it consists of three factions. The first faction are those who are falling out of old working class communities and traditions, and they're not very educated, and they're looking backwards to an imagined or real past, which is why I call them atavists. And atavists tend to look to populists for simple solutions and are listening to the sirens of neo-fascism, luring them to a right-wing type of politics. The second faction consists of those who are often demonized by or for the first faction. They consist of the migrants, the ethnic minorities, the Roma, you name it, or some group. They tend to keep their heads down. They fear becoming refugees. They fear expulsion. They suffer an ontological insecurity. And they're nostalgic because they have no sense of home. The third group are the progressives, the educated, mostly young, most of whom I find myself talking to around the world, and they have been denied a future, a sense of future. They were told to go to university to get a career. They were told to go to university to become something in society. And they know they were sold a lottery ticket. And when they came out, the lottery ticket has cost them more and more, and the prospect of a future is dimmer and dimmer. Now, all three factions have distinctive consciousness, which is vital for understanding a class. The class consciousness is one of relative deprivation, relative to time in each case, relative to a sense of security because they don't have any security, facing a life of uncertainty, and what I call the 4 A's. Anxiety, alienation, they have to do what they don't want to do and cannot do what they would like to do, anomie, because they despair of escape, and most importantly, anger. That anger is growing around the world. But do not think they want the social democratic model of the past any more than the neoliberal model of today. I saw a piece of graffiti on a wall in Madrid, which I've used as a motif in the new book. The worst thing would be to go back to the old normal. They're not looking for 30 years in full-time jobs, stretching forward. They're looking for work, they're looking for capacity to develop themselves, but they don't look back to that old model with any fondness. And the second aphorism or piece of graffiti which has really played in my ears a lot and explains why turnouts at elections have been so low. My dreams are not found in your ballot box. That's a very important set of graffiti, I think. But we're in an interesting phase where I think the precariat is becoming a class for itself. And in that regard, it is useful to conclude by thinking of what are the great principles for resolving a great transformation, for a double movement. The first is to remember that every new forward march is led by the insecurities, the needs, and the aspirations of the emerging mass class, not yesterday's vanguard, not yesterday's proletariat or middle class. It's going to be the precariat. So we need to understand what it is that motivates and faces the precariat. The second great principle is that every new forward march towards more emancipation and equality involves new forms of collective action. That is why, if you want to clear the hall when you're talking to the precariat, if you start talking about trade unions, you will only fill the bars around your place. They will all rush out. New forms of collective action are vitally needed, but they won't be like yesterday's. And the third great principle is that a new forward march involves three overlapping struggles. The first struggle is a struggle for recognition. Nancy Fraser has also talked about these three, but I think this is in a different context. The struggle for recognition made huge strides in 2011, 2012, and 2013 with the Occupy movement, the Arab Spring, Getchi Park, the Brazilians, the Swedish riots, and so on. Because in the process, more and more people in the precariat, instead of looking in the mirror in the morning and seeing a failure, in saying an inadequate person, they looked in the mirror and they saw that they were one of millions. One of a lot of people who were experiencing structural problems, a system that wants a precariat, and that they are expected to conform. But in seeing themselves in others in that mirror, they could forge a sense of pride. That sense of recognition, I'm going to get a notice. Thank you. Wow. That sense of recognition is a vital phase in becoming a class. Because unless you identify yourself as part of a common grouping, you're not going to be able to forge a progressive agenda. It is wonderful in the last 3 or 4 years how blogs and discussion groups and social networking and all the different movements have been crystallizing in all sorts of ways around the world. The second struggle is one that has only just begun. It is a struggle for representation, a struggle for representation of the voice of the precariat in every agency of the state. At the moment, the precariat is being treated by social welfare agencies, by trade unions, even by sociologists, as somehow victims to be treated and to be subject to employment improvement or retraining or therapy or something like that. That's not good enough. The precariat wants representation. It wants a sense of agency in every part of the state. And it is beginning to demand it. And only if that happens will we see return of some respect to due process. The third struggle is a struggle for redistribution. But it won't be a struggle for redistribution as the old proletariat thought of it. Not a struggle for the means of production. Yawning would follow. It is a struggle for the key assets that allow the precariat to reproduce itself. And in a way, and which was why the Precariat is becoming a transformative class. It wants to redistribute the assets that, in a sense, would make the Precariat strong enough to abolish itself, because there would no longer be a life of precarity. What are the key assets? Besides income, and we need a new system of income distribution, the first key asset is security. Security is far more unequally distributed today than income. If you're up here in the salariat or somewhere, you have complete security. If you're down here in the precariat, you have no security at all. You've got a small child, you're living hand to mouth, your debts are piling up, you have no security. We need a struggle for basic security, which is one of the major reasons why I believe a basic income must form a key part of the new system of income distribution. The second key asset is control of time. We live in a society of tertiary time. 2 minutes? 2 minutes. We live in a society of tertiary time in which people in the precariat are suffering from what I call the precariatized mind. They never know what to do. What is the key thing to do? What to do? Should I retrain? Should I re-network? Have no control of my time. We need a politics of time in order to enable people in the precariat to have some sense of control over their time. The third key asset is quality space. Here, with the privatization of the commons, the shrinking of space, the use of social policy to take away space, and all the aspects of living outside the commodified existence, means that quality space is a key part of the redistributive agenda. The fourth is somewhat more parochial, if you like, but vital in the modern society, which is financial knowledge. We need a strategy for the public right to financial knowledge. Fifth, and possibly most importantly of all, we need a strategy for the redistribution of education. Because in the commodification of education, the elite are getting that liberating Hegelian type of education. Down in the precariat, you're human capital, you're being prepared for jobs, and you're being churned through with higher and higher debts. And the fifth is we need a strategy for the redistribution of financial and other capital. And we will only get that if we realize that wages per se in rich industrialized countries will continue to decline, whereas profits and rental incomes will continue to climb. We didn't need Thomas Piketty to tell us that. It's actually rental income that is growing through intellectual property and through resources and so on. And we need to establish capital funds, democratic capital funds. Now, I'll stop at that point because I must. We're going to continue to talk about the Charter in that session. And thank you very much for listening so patiently. Thank you.